On a quiet morning at the airbase, she walked across the tarmac like she always did, clipboard in hand, checking each aircraft before the pilots even stepped close. To most of the squadron, she was simply ground crew. She fueled the jets, tightened bolts, and ran pre-flight inspections, tasks essential yet often overlooked. But behind her steady hands and calm voice was a knowledge of the F-16 that ran deeper than the pilots realized. She could read the machine like a story, spotting the smallest flaw before it turned into danger in the air. Still, few noticed her skill. In a world where fighter jets roared and calcines carried weight, her work often disappeared into the background noise of engines and radio chatter. Pilots nodded politely, some barely remembering her name. She never complained, though, because she knew every time one of those jets soared into the sky, a piece of her effort was flying with it. But everything changed on a training exercise that should have gone smoothly. A sudden storm rolled in over the desert, scattering the squadron and breaking formation. Static filled the comms as seasoned pilots struggled to regain control and regroup. That's when something unexpected cut through the chaos. One of the F-16s, its pilot's voice, urgent, specifically requested her not as ground support, but as their flight lead. For a moment, silence fell across the channel. Ground crew, flight lead. No one could believe what they'd just heard. She froze. Two, standing with her headset pressed tight, heart racing. She wasn't supposed to be part of the cockpit chatter, let alone called to lead in the middle of a crisis. Yet the request was clear, and it wasn't made lightly. Someone in the air trusted her knowledge above all else. Why would a trained fighter pilot ask for her? And what secret had she kept hidden from those who thought they knew her role? The answer was about to shake the entire squadron. The other voices on the radio crackled with confusion. A flight lead wasn't chosen on a whim, and certainly not from someone who wasn't even in the air. Yet the pilot who made the request sounded firm, almost desperate. He knew something the others didn't. On the ground, she tightened her grip on the headset. Torn between the rules she'd been trained to follow and the trust being placed in her. At that very moment, she had never spoken much about her past. Not because she wanted to hide, but because it was easier to let people believe she was just another technician keeping planes ready for flight. Few knew that before working on the line, she had trained alongside some of the very pilots she now supported. Life had taken a turn that pulled her out of the cockpit, but her instincts, her sharp mind for tactics, and her natural feel for the skies had never left her. Every time she watched the jets take off, part of her longed to be back up there. She would trace flight patterns in her head, predicting maneuvers, correcting errors no one else even noticed. It wasn't arrogance, it was experience that couldn't be erased. That was why the pilot's request struck deeper than anyone could imagine. Back in the air, the storm only grew worse. Radar screens flickered, and the formation risked breaking apart completely. A wrong call could mean more than a failed exercise, it could mean real danger for the squadron. That was when her name came over the radio again, louder this time, clear with urgency. The others waited, holding their breath, unsure how she would answer. Would she step into a role no one believed she was meant to fill? Or would the storm swallow the squadron before she ever spoke a word? Her breath caught as the pilot repeated her name, the request cutting through the static like a challenge she couldn't ignore. Around her, the control room had fallen silent. Technicians exchanged stunned glances. Supervisors leaned in, but no one said a word. It was as if the entire base was waiting to see whether she would step out of the shadows she had lived in for so long. The truth was, she hadn't always been ground crew. Years earlier, before most of these pilots even earned their wings, she had been chosen for advanced training. She knew the F-16 not just as a machine, but as a partner in the sky. Her instructors had praised her instincts, saying she could see the rhythm of the air in ways others couldn't. but when a sudden family responsibility pulled her from the program. Her dream of flying had quietly faded. Rather than leave the world of aviation behind, she returned as support, working under the radar, letting her skills remain hidden. Still, not everyone had forgotten. The pilot calling her name was one of the few who had trained with her. One who remembered the way she could steady a flight when others lost control. For him, trust in her wasn't a gamble, it was the only way through the chaos now unfolding in the storm. She stood frozen, headset in hand, heart pounding with the weight of choice. Around her, the storm's roar outside mirrored the storm. Inside, she could ignore the call, remain the quiet figure checking planes at dawn. Or she could answer, stepping back into a role that had once been hers, knowing it would change everything the squadron thought they knew about her. The radio hissed, waiting. The squadron hung in danger, and her silence was running out of time. She finally pressed the comms button, her voice calm but firm, carrying across the storm of static. "I have you," she said, her words steady despite the pounding in her chest. The pilots, scattered and disoriented, suddenly found an anchor in her tone. The silence that followed wasn't doubt, it was anticipation. A waiting breath before the storm broke again. From the ground, she began issuing quick instructions, her eyes darting between radar screens and weather updates. Each command cut through the chaos, sharp and decisive. Adjust heading 3 degrees west. Drop altitude by 200 feet. Keep formation tight. The pilots obeyed, and slowly the pieces began to fall back into place. But the storm was not letting go. Wind shear slammed one jet sideways. Lightning flashed too close for comfort. And every second felt like a razor's edge between control and disaster. Her hands trembled as she gripped the console, but her voice never betrayed the fear. The control room watched in awe. Realizing she wasn't improvising, she was leading with the precision of someone who had lived inside that cockpit before. The pilots, hardened and disciplined, followed her without question now, their faith shifting with every command she gave. Then came the moment that twisted everything tighter. One F-16, the same pilot who had called for her, reported a systems malfunction mid-storm. His controls were slipping, and he was losing altitude fast. The radio filled with warnings, overlapping shouts, and the frantic beeping of alarms. All eyes turned to her. This wasn't just about keeping a formation intact anymore. This was life or death. If she hesitated, he would be gone in seconds. If she acted, she would be stepping fully into the role everyone said she could never have. The storm raged louder. The jet dipped lower. And her next words would decide everything. Her voice was about to cut through the chaos when another transmission broke in, one that no one expected. A second pilot, flying on the far edge of the formation, reported his instruments were failing too. His compass spun wildly, his navigation locked by the storm, and he was drifting straight into restricted airspace. The squadron now faced 2 emergencies at once: one jet losing altitude, another veering off course. It was the kind of nightmare scenario that could unravel everything in seconds. The control room erupted in overlapping voices. Officers barking orders, technicians scrambling for solutions. But amid the confusion, all eyes fell back on her. She had steadied the squadron once, but now the storm had doubled the stakes. If she focused on the pilot losing altitude, the other could stray into danger that would spark an international incident. She turned her attention to the drifting jet. The first might not recover in time. Her pulse raced as she listened to both voices crackling in her headset. Each pilot trusted her to find the answer, but the clock was ticking down. Fast. Lightning split the sky outside, casting the airbase in a flash of white, as though nature itself was warning them that there would be no second chances. The pilots waited. The storm raged, and the squadron teetered on the edge of disaster. For years, she had kept her knowledge hidden. But now every decision carried the weight of lives, reputations, and even the future of the unit itself. The pilots had no one else to turn to, no one else who could see the entire picture. Her lips parted, her voice ready to break the deadlock. But before she could speak, new signal came through the radio-coded transmission that no one in the room had clearance to understand, and it was addressed directly to her. The control room stayed silent as her call sign echoed over the comms, a name she hadn't heard in years. It was the identity she had once carried with pride, a reminder of the time she trained not as ground crew, but as a pilot meant to lead. Slowly, she lowered the headset, the weight of the moment sinking in. Around her, the officers and technicians who had once overlooked her now stared with a mix of awe and respect. The woman they had thought of only as support had just guided an entire squadron through one of the most dangerous storms they had ever faced. When the pilots landed, they climbed down from their jets, not with the swagger of victory, but with the gratitude of men and women who knew they had been saved. The one who had first called for her walked across the tarmac and saluted not as a formality, but as recognition. In that simple gesture, the unspoken truth was clear. She had earned her place not as a shadow on the runway, but as someone Watower